Oops. Yeah, we want to talk about the Nicene and post-Nicene fathers and mothers too. All right. We're just going to look at some individuals. Some we've already talked about, and we'll hit them briefly, but then others we'll spend a little bit more time with. I know that all of you are too young to remember the show Father Knows Best. Okay, but it was Robert Young and Jane Wyatt as parents of two teenagers, and it was anyway. The idea was Father knows best. Well, you know, fathers don't always know best, and so we're not going to agree with our church fathers at all points. But also we want to recognize that church mothers were important too. Because history generally was written by men, about men, we very rarely come across names of Christian women, but they were there, they were important, and we certainly want to discuss those who come to our attention. When I was doing my master's degree, I was living in Lubbock. I was a member of a very conservative church, but I was attending a more moderate university. And I did my master's thesis on women in the early church. And I found that I was too conservative for my professors, but I was a little bit too moderate for my church. My pastor once told me that there were no women in the early church. And I said, well, if that were the case, there would have been no medieval church, because the church would have died without women. And of course, my pastor was being facetious when he said that, but we were so conservative, we would not even allow women to pray in church or give their testimony. They could not speak. They were allowed to sing, but that was it. So anyway, that was just a very conservative church. All right, moving along. We've already spoken at length about Athanasius, but just to kind of fill in the blanks, he was known as the Black Dwarf. Evidently, he was very short, and being from Egypt, probably was part of the Coptic sect in Egypt. He was born humbly. He was educated at Alexandria. He came to the attention of Alexander as a child, because Alexander looked out his window and he saw some children playing in the street, and they were playing at church. And one boy was taking the role of bishop, and he was baptizing the other children. And this was Athanasius, and so he brought Athanasius in, and eventually Athanasius became the deacon and secretary to Alexander. He was in close contact with the Desert Fathers. He wrote the life of St. Anthony. We've already looked at Anthony, but it was because of Athanasius's biography that Anthony became well known, and monasticism became a popular movement. In 328, Athanasius succeeded Alexander as the bishop. Now, even before the threat of Arianism, he wrote the treatise on the Incarnation and insisted that the central fact of Christian faith in human history is the incarnation of God in Jesus Christ. So that's why when Arius came up with his false teaching, Athanasius recognized the danger of it and became such an advocate for orthodoxy. However, in 328, when Athanasius was elected bishop, at the same time, Arius was recalled from exile, and Athanasius refused to allow him to return to his position as priest in the city, and so Constantine banished Athanasius. His sons then recalled Athanasius, and as emperors vacillated between Arian and Nicene theologies, Athanasius endured 5 exiles during his 45 years as Bishop of Alexandria. During his 45 years, he was away from Alexandria for 17 of those years during five of his exiles. Well, there's some fascinating stories, and perhaps you've read them in Justo Gonzalez, but just an interesting story. He was accused of murdering a man named Arsenius, and having cut off his hand to use it in rites of black magic. So when he was tried, Athanasius brought into the room a man covered in a cloak, hooded and long sleeves. And so he made sure that everyone in the room would recognize Arsenius. So he threw back his hood, and everybody said, "Oh, that's Arsenius. He's alive." Well, you still might have cut off his hand to use in this magic rite. So Athanasius pulled up one of his sleeves, and they said, "It was the other hand." So he pulled up the other sleeve. So there Arsenius stands, recognizable with both of his hands, and then Athanasius said, "What? Do you think he's some kind of monster with 3 hands?" Okay, so Athanasius was exonerated. Well, another great story is when Athanasius was escaping from Alexandria because the emperor had sent some soldiers to capture him. He was sailing down the Nile, and here comes this imperial ship following. And so as he's standing on the side of the ship, the soldiers call to him, "Have you seen Athanasius?" "Well, yes, I have." Okay, very truthfully. Said, "Where is he?" He said, "Well, he's ahead of you. If you hurry up, you'll catch him." Well, he was ahead of them. Okay? And so then as they sailed along, they passed him up and passed him by, and so he escaped. All right, he died in 373, which is before the Council of Constantinople, but their orthodoxy triumphed over Arianism. All right, the Cappadocian Fathers, we'll look at them a little bit more carefully. Here is a map of that area, and you see Asia Minor or Turkey, and here is Cappadocia on the northern border. And the family tree, these are the Basil and Gregory of Nyssa came from a long line of Christians. Their parents, Basil the Elder and Amelia, came from Christian families that had been persecuted during the Great Persecution. They had, I believe, 12 children. The oldest was known as Macrina the Younger because she was named for her grandmother, Macrina, who's known as, obviously, Macrina the Elder. But then we've looked at Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, both bishops, and then the youngest was Peter, who became Bishop of Sebaste. So a very prominent family. Basil the Great went to school with Gregory of Nazianzus and Julian the Apostate. You remember that Julian was the emperor who tried to revoke Christianity in the empire. But there was a brother named Naucratius who died suddenly. And in the aftermath of the grief over Naucratius's death, Macrina came to her brother Basil. Basil had been studying, hoping to have a career in rhetoric, oratory. He wanted fame, he wanted fortune, and Macrina said that you are wasting your life on these worldly pursuits. Look at Naucratius. He no longer lives. You need to step up and pursue a spiritual life, that your life would count for something eternal. And so Basil began to pursue the monastic life. He wrote Basil's Rule. He gathered around him others who wanted to live a secluded, devoted Christian life. and he became known as the father of Eastern monasticism. Now, in 364, he was called to Caesarea of Cappadocia as priest, and then in 370 he became the bishop. Notice that there are a number of cities called Caesarea. That's because they're all named after one Caesar or another, but we need to be careful that we don't get them confused, as I often do. He came into conflict with the Emperor Valens, who was Arian. Valens decided he was going to weaken the influence of Basel by dividing Cappadocia in two. That would create two dioceses, and he appointed an Arian as bishop over Cappadocia Minor. And so Basel then, wanting to overbalance, he ordained his brother Gregory and his friend Gregory as bishops. Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Sosima. Both of these men were very unsuited to public church life, and we'll discuss that later. They were very resentful of Basel for having forced ordination on them. And Basel died in 379. Gregory of Nyssa, his brother, pursued literary life. He also wanted to be a rhetorician, an orator. He married, but his wife died. And then mid-life, he had an interesting conversion experience. I hope that when I taught about martyrdom, I told the story about the 40 martyrs of Sebaste. The 40 soldiers who were told to renounce Christ or die. And the general, they refused to renounce Christ, and so their commander put them out on the frozen lake. And there only one of them renounced Christ, but then one of the soldiers guarding them claimed Christ and joined them, and so all 40 died on this frozen lake overnight. So we have the story of the 40 martyrs of Sebaste. If you want to read more about it, I wrote that story and posted it on Blackboard in Unit 1. It's a great story. Please read it. But the point is that this was in Sebaste, which was in Cappadocia. So these martyrs were honored in this area. And on their feast day, Gregory was at home napping, and he had this dream that the 40 martyrs had created a gauntlet, and he was having to run back and forth between these martyrs who were beating him with rods and chastising him because he was seeking a worldly life instead of pursuing a spiritual life. And so he woke up and realized that he needed to devote his life to the Christian cause. And so then he was baptized and he pursued the Christian life. Okay? We're going to have to stop right there. Y'all are not listening fast enough, but we will pick this up right here in 2 weeks.